I wish I could tell you I planned it. That I set out to betray the man I promised to love forever. But the truth is, it just happened. And now I can't stop thinking about his best friend's hands on my skin. It started with something so innocent, it still makes me ache how quickly it turned into something else. My husband had left the dinner party early, headache or so he said. I stayed behind because I was still trying to make it seem like things were okay between us. He'd grown distant over the past year. Cold. Like I was someone he used to love but didn't quite remember why. We barely touched anymore. We barely looked at each other. But his best friend? Nathan looked at me like I was the last truth left in the world. Like I hadn't disappeared. That night I was wearing a black silk dress. Nothing scandalous, just something that made me feel like I still had a pulse. I was rinsing wine glasses in the kitchen, half distracted, when he walked in and closed the door behind him. Just the two of us. The sound of distant laughter from the living room. The hum of the dishwasher. His eyes on my back. "Can I help?" he asked, voice low, like even he knew something was different. I turned around, smiling politely, but I felt it, that shift. That tight pull in the air between us. And then his hand brushed mine as he reached for a glass, and my breath caught in my throat. That was it. The touch. A second too long. Warm. Intentional. My whole body stiffened, then melted. "Nate!" I whispered, not even knowing why I said his name like that. He didn't move away. He just looked at me like he was holding back something volcanic. Like he'd been holding it back for a long, long time. The silence stretched. His eyes dropped to my mouth. My heart stuttered. "I shouldn't be here," I said, but I didn't move either. His answer came so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I've been hoping you would be." That's when I knew. This wasn't new for him. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was something that had lived inside him, maybe longer than I could admit. I felt my body leaning before my mind could scream no. But just before anything happened, just before it crossed that irreversible line, someone knocked on the door. And everything shattered into breathless silence. The knock on the door snapped us out of it like cold water poured down the spine. I blinked and stepped back so fast I almost tripped over the dishwasher door. Nathan cleared his throat and turned away, pretending to inspect the wine rack. It was Sarah, our mutual friend, popping her head in with a carefree, "You guys okay in here?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just finishing up." Nathan didn't say a word. She nodded and disappeared, but the damage was done. The spell was broken. We didn't speak as we finished cleaning, but I could feel him. Every movement, every breath, every time he got too close to me again. It was like standing next to a fire I wasn't allowed to touch. That night, after the party, I lay next to my husband in bed. He didn't ask how it went. Didn't reach for me. Just rolled over and scrolled through his phone. I stared at the ceiling, still feeling the echo of Nathan's hand on mine. This wasn't how my marriage was supposed to feel. When we first got married, I thought I'd found the kind of love people wrote songs about. But somewhere between his late nights at work, the quiet dinners filled with nothing but the clink of forks, and the way he stopped seeing me, really seeing me, I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. And through all of it, Nathan had been there. Always polite. Always present. But sometimes his eyes would linger. Just long enough to make me wonder. There was one night last fall I remembered all too clearly. We were hosting a small game night. Everyone had left except him. My husband had gone upstairs to sleep. Nathan and I stayed behind, still laughing over a stupid board game. And then, I caught him looking at me in this way that made me forget what I was saying mid-sentence. I asked him then, "What?" He just smiled and said, "Nothing. You just haven't laughed like that in a long time." That was the first time I felt it. The pull. But I buried it. Because I was married. Because he was my husband's best friend. Because some lines aren't meant to be crossed. But after tonight, I realized I wasn't the only one who'd felt it. Nathan wanted me to. And I didn't know whether to run from that feeling. Or let it pull me under. I told myself I wouldn't see him again. At least not alone. Not until this ache in my chest stopped feeling like hunger. But a week later it was like the universe had other plans. My husband had to travel for work. A last-minute trip. He barely kissed me goodbye, just tossed his bag in the car and said, "Back Sunday night." That same afternoon Nathan texted, I left my watch at your place the night of the party. Mind if I swing by? I stared at the screen. My heart gave a small dangerous flutter. I could have said no. I could have told him I'd leave it on the porch. But I didn't. Instead, I cleaned the kitchen, put on soft music, changed into something simple, but if I'm being honest, something that made me feel like I might still be beautiful to someone. When he showed up, it was raining. He stood in the doorway, damp hair falling into his eyes, a half-smile playing on his lips like he knew what kind of storm he was really walking into. I handed him the watch, barely meeting his gaze. Here, I said, voice a little too light. He didn't take it. Not right away. Instead, he stepped inside, closed the door. The rain whispered against the windows behind him. His voice was quiet. Can I ask you something? I nodded. That night in the kitchen, did you feel it too? My throat tightened. I looked down at the watch in my hand, now trembling slightly. Yes, I whispered. I did. There was a pause, so long I thought he might turn and leave. But when I finally looked up, his eyes were soft and dark and full of something I couldn't unsee. I'm not proud of it, he said. But I've been trying not to want you for a long time. And something in me broke open. I stepped back like distance might protect me. But my body was already betraying me. The way my fingers curled tighter around the watch. The way my breath caught. The way the silence between us started to burn. I'm married, I said, because I had to. Because I needed to remind myself. I know. He didn't move closer. He didn't touch me. But his voice, God, his voice was like heat curling around my skin. I'd never do anything to hurt you. Or him. But if you told me to leave right now, I would. I didn't tell him to leave. Instead, I opened the drawer, placed the watch inside, and stood there staring at the sink, breathing too hard. He came up behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him but still not touching. I think about you, he said, barely audible. More than I should. I closed my eyes. My hands trembled on the edge of the counter. Still, I didn't stop him. And then I felt it, his breath soft against the curve of my neck. We stood there, suspended in something we couldn't name, something we didn't yet dare to act on. But my skin had already answered the question. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because I knew. If I faced him in that moment, I wouldn't stop myself. His breath was warm behind me. Not touching but close enough to feel. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Saturated. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. You should go, I whispered, though it came out like a question. But Nathan didn't move. I will, he said just as softly. I will. If that's really what you want. I bit my lip. My whole body was at war. Memory versus desire, loyalty versus something wild and ancient and aching to be seen. And still he didn't touch me. That restraint made it worse. Because I wanted him to. I wanted his hands. I wanted the way his eyes looked at me like I was a secret he'd never tell. I turned slowly, and when our eyes met, it was like time folded inward. Like the air got thinner. He looked wrecked. Like he hadn't slept since the last time we were alone. I think about you too, I said, even though I shouldn't have. Even though saying it made everything real. His jaw clenched. His hand lifted halfway like he was going to brush my hair back, but stopped himself. Don't say that unless you mean it. I wouldn't have let you stay if I didn't. That did something to him. I saw it in the way he swallowed, in the way his shoulders rose with his breath like he was holding back a scream. Then tell me to touch you, he said, voice low, raw. Or tell me to leave. I won't survive anything in between. God. I don't know how long we stood there, seconds, maybe minutes. Long enough to feel like I'd stepped out of my life, and into something I wouldn't be able to undo. And I still didn't answer. Instead, I closed the space between us. I didn't kiss him. I didn't even raise my hands. I just leaned close enough that our foreheads touched, our breaths tangled, and I whispered, we shouldn't. But my body pressed into his like it didn't care about consequences. He exhaled sharply, barely moving, barely there. I know. His hand finally found my waist. And everything in me lit up like I'd been sleepwalking for years. We didn't cross the line. Not that night. Not all the way. But we hovered on the edge of it, our foreheads pressed together, our hearts crashing in silence, our bodies speaking everything we didn't dare say aloud. And when he left just before the door clicked shut, he looked back once. I won't touch you until you ask me to. I've never wanted anything more in my life. Took 5 days. 5 days of pretending nothing had changed. Of folding laundry next to a husband who didn't ask how I was. Of scrolling past Nathan's name on my phone, even though my fingers hovered there like they had a mind of their own. But the ache didn't go away. It got worse. It grew with every memory of how it felt to stand that close to someone who saw me. So when Nathan texted again, just a simple, "I can't stop thinking about you," I didn't wait. I told my husband I needed some air. He didn't even look up from his laptop. I drove with shaking hands. I wasn't sure if I was heading towards something or running from it. But when Nathan opened the door, and I saw the way he looked at me, like he'd been holding his breath all week, something inside me collapsed. He didn't speak, just stepped back and let me in. It was quiet, still, the kind of stillness that lives between two people about to break a promise. He moved toward me slowly like he was afraid I'd disappear. And I just stood there, helpless to the gravity pulling me toward him. Nathan. But before I could say anything more, his hands found my face. Gently, like I was something sacred. "Tell me to stop," he said, his forehead touching mine again. "And I will." I didn't. This time I didn't whisper doubts. I didn't step back. I pulled him to me like I'd been drowning, and he was the first breath I'd taken in years. The kiss didn't start slow. It started desperate. Like all that restraint had been held back behind a dam, and now the flood. His hands traced my back, my waist, my shoulders. Every place he touched sparked to life. When he kissed my neck, I forgot my name. When he whispered, "I've wanted this for so long," into my skin, I almost cried. It wasn't just the heat. It was the way my body responded, like it recognized him. Like it had been waiting for him all this time. Clothes came off slowly, reverently. Like we were memorizing the moment. His hands moved like they were asking permission with every touch. And my body answered, arching, trembling, aching into his. We didn't rush. We savored. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of breath and the quiet hum of rain against the windows. Again, always the rain. When it was over, I lay there wrapped in him, his heartbeat loud in my ear. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "You feel like home." And in that moment, I didn't feel guilty. I felt alive. I didn't move for a long time. Just lay there, draped across Nathan's chest, listening to the sound of his breathing. It was steady, anchoring, like he wasn't the chaos at all, but the calm I'd been craving in the middle of my unraveling life. His fingers traced lazy circles on my back, and I could feel the way he kept glancing down at me, as if making sure I hadn't vanished. Neither of us said the obvious. That we'd crossed a line. That we couldn't go back. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not because I regretted it, but because I didn't. And that scared me. His arm tightened around me. "Don't be." But I was. Sorry that I didn't feel like it was a mistake. Sorry that part of me had wanted this long before I was willing to admit it. Sorry that this moment felt more like truth than anything I'd felt in years. We stayed tangled together until the sky outside began to shift. The storm had passed. The rain softened to mist, and the streetlights cast quiet gold shadows across the sheets. Eventually, I sat up and wrapped the blanket around myself. My skin still tingled. My body was flushed. But reality had started to seep back in. Nathan watched me in silence, his eyes unreadable. I felt vulnerable. Exposed. Like now that the spell was broken, he might regret everything. But he didn't. He reached for my hand. Held it with both of his like it was something fragile. "I've loved you for a long time," he said quietly. And I never thought I'd say that out loud. My heart broke at the sound of it because I believed him. And because I wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. I stood and began to dress slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. He walked me to the door without pressure, without asking me for more. Just with eyes that followed me like they already missed me. And when I turned to leave, he said, "If this is the last time, I'll understand. But if it's not, I'll be here." I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because a part of me already knew, this wasn't the last time. It was only the beginning. Everything after that night felt different. Sharper. Like the colors of the world had quietly shifted. And no one else had noticed but me. I went home and kissed my husband like nothing had changed. I folded laundry. I smiled at dinner. I pretended I hadn't come undone in another man's arms just hours before. But inside I was pulsing with it. With guilt. With heat. With the memory of Nathan's breath against my skin. I told myself it was a one-time thing. A mistake. Something born out of loneliness and timing and too much silence in my marriage. But I was lying. Because 3 nights later, I found myself outside Nathan's apartment again. And he didn't even say a word when he opened the door. He just pulled me in and held me like he'd been counting the hours since I'd left. We didn't rush this time. We kissed like we were trying to understand what this thing between us was. Like we were looking for answers in each other's mouths. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years, how invisible I'd felt, how tired I was of being touched like a duty instead of a desire. And he listened. Really listened. Ran his thumb over my cheek like he was erasing every bruise my marriage never left on my body, but carved deep into my heart. That night we didn't sleep. We stayed wrapped around each other like the moment might vanish if we closed our eyes. And somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., he whispered, "I don't want this to be a secret forever." My chest tightened. I wanted to say me too. But I had a husband, a life, a history. And this thing with Nathan, this fire we were feeding in the dark, it couldn't survive daylight. Or so I thought. Until the next morning, when I opened my phone and saw a message from him. "I don't care what it costs. I'm in this. All the way. Just say the word." And I stared at it for a long, long time. Because suddenly it didn't feel like an affair. It felt like a choice I hadn't dared to make. Until now. I didn't answer his message right away. I held my phone like it might explode in my hands. My heart was doing that erratic, breathless thing again, like it couldn't decide between running away or running straight into the fire. And then I heard it, my husband's voice from downstairs. Calm. Casual. But something in it made me pause. "I think I left my charger in your car," he called up. That was normal. Innocent. Except, I hadn't told him I'd gone anywhere last night. I grabbed my robe and came downstairs trying to act like nothing was off. He was standing in the kitchen scrolling through his phone, still in his work clothes. But his eyes, when they met mine, they were too steady. Too quiet. "You were out late," he said, not accusing. "Just fishing." "I went for a drive," I replied. Cleared my head. He nodded. Said nothing. But then he asked, "You see Nathan lately?" My breath caught. Just for a second. But it was enough. "I ran into him last week." I lied, reaching for a glass to distract myself. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just wondering." I turned and he was watching me. Not the way Nathan did, with heat and reverence, but with suspicion, calculation. And suddenly I knew. He knew. Or maybe he didn't know, but he felt it. I left the kitchen shaking. Locked the bathroom door. Sat on the floor with my heart in my throat. And I did the one thing I hadn't let myself do yet. I imagined leaving. Really leaving. Not for the drama. Not for revenge. But because somewhere between all the quiet neglect and long silences, my heart had started beating for someone else. Someone who looked at me like I was more than convenient. That night I texted Nathan. "I'm ready. But we have to be careful. He suspects something." His response came seconds later. "I've got us. Whatever happens next, you're not doing it alone." And just like that, we were no longer playing with fire. We were the fire. Burning in silence. Planning in secret. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The next morning, I left the house with a suitcase in my trunk. And a new story just waiting to begin.